Today on Alimentos y Emociones podcast, we're talking to Alice Kinnenmuth about the home environment. Alice is currently a postgraduate research student in the final stages of her PhD, based in the School of Psychology at the University of Leeds. Her PhD research utilizes data from GEMINI, twin birth cohort, to explore the role of the obesogenic home environment in children's appetite, energy balance behaviors, and weight development. She also recently paused her PhD to work as a research assistant on a project examining the immediate and longer-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the home environment and children's health and well-being. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Alimentos y Emociones podcast. It's really good of you to be back. Thank you for returning. I'm trying to do this series on appetite, behavior, and weight, and just all subjects that are interrelated with it. So today I have a really special guest. Hi, Alice. It's really nice to have you here today. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I've been trying to invite people who have, who I worked with while I was doing my PhD, but also, just people who like this topic of appetite and behavior. And obviously you've done some really, really interesting work right now. And I know that you're still a PhD student, which says absolutely nothing, because the work that you've done has been amazing. And so we're going to talk about the home environment today. And my first question to you would be how did you get into this topic? How did you start? What did you train as initially as well?
Yeah, so that's the big question. So I did my undergraduate in nutrition and public health, with the intention to go down the nutritionist/dietetics route. And as part of my degree, I did a placement year. So that was a year of work where I worked in a public health department of the government. And that was really an eye-opening opportunity. I had the opportunity to evaluate a weight management service. And as part of that, I was able to talk to people that had been on the weight management service and gain their experiences of it. And that really got me interested in the psychology behind eating behaviours. So I really wanted to explore that more and gain a solid psychological understanding, because I didn't have that from my undergraduate degree. So that drew me to go and do a master's in health psychology at the University of Leeds. And there is where I feel like it was kind of a pivotal point in my life. I feel like I got really lucky. I met Dr. Alison Files, and she kind of opened my eyes to a whole world of research that I didn't even know existed, and an area that I soon became really fascinated in. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today. And,
that's really interesting.
History.
Well, I think that it's not a long sort of career that you have yet, and yet you've done so much, and this area of the home environment is an important one. And I think that, when you started choosing what research you were going to do for your PhD, and by the way, it's just really nice to have, someone from a nutrition background, because so far I've only spoken to people with, different backgrounds, or mainly psychological. So that always, I think we have a different perspective as well. So
yeah, I think nutrition's definitely my passion, and that was what I always saw myself going into.
Yeah.
But I think when I met Alison, it kind of changed my viewpoint on things a bit. And I'm still really interested in nutrition, but I think it's interesting to see it from more of a behavioural and epidemiological viewpoint. I think that's why the PhD, when the opportunity came up to work with GEMINI and the amazing cohort that's there, I really couldn't pass it up. It was just, it was an opportunity that doesn't really come around very often.
So you're about to finish, you're sort of very close to the finish, which is never a nice place to be at, or maybe sometimes it is. You've managed to publish right now like these 2 really, really interesting systematic reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, take it from wherever you want, from the beginning. How, should we talk a bit about the first review, the second, how would you like to do this?
We can do it sequentially. So the first one that I started, it's the second one that got published, but it's the first one that I started, was the CBQ and BBQ meta-analysis and systematic review. So that one, Andrea's talked about it on the podcast before, but that one was, it was an opportunity that Alison presented to me. And at the time, I didn't take on the gravitas of the task. I think I was quite naive. And at the time, I didn't fully.
You said, yes, of course I'll do it.
Yeah, I was like, brilliant. Yeah,
that sounds interesting.
Like an opportunity. Yeah. Everybody else was looking on thinking, poor girl. But it was really a great opportunity to understand the appetite traits and eating behaviour and the amazing work that's been done in this area before. So that was the first thing that I did as part of my PhD, to start this review. And then we apart from the difficulty in doing it, what, like, as an outsider, as it were, not really knowing about the traits and stuff, like, how did you feel with the results that came out, and what were the main results that you found? So the results were, for us, really promising and really nice to see. So what we saw was what the group had always hypothesized, that food approach traits, so food responsiveness, emotional overeating, enjoyment of food, and desire to drink, were positively associated with weight, and then food avoidant traits, the satiety responsiveness, slowness in eating, emotional overeating, and food fussiness, they were negatively associated with weight. So that's always what they believed within the group and hypothesized. But it was really, really almost rewarding to see that was, it was a good outcome. Yeah, to pull that information and to really quantify that actually was what we were observing in populations.
And it wasn't a small number of studies either. So we're talking about, 67 or 6? And then
67 CBQ studies and 5 BBQ studies. So of those 27, we were able to include in the meta-analysis and be able to quantify the associations between appetite and adiposity. And then the other ones we looked at narratively, because there was quite a difference in how people reported it, the way that they looked at the association. So we couldn't include those in a meta-analysis. But across the board, what we found was that food approach traits were consistently associated, positively associated with weight, and that food avoidant traits were negatively associated. which was really in line with behavioural susceptibility theories, that a more rabid appetite for higher scores on food approach traits and lower scores on food avoidant traits predispose us to weight gain. So it was really reassuring in that sense, and really nice to be a part of that work. And quite a pivotal paper. Quite a key paper for the group.
Definitely a key paper. We've all cited it now, so.
And it was nice because I think the work had originally started when Claire Llewellyn was doing her PhD, so it was nice to be able to bring that
to fruition.
Exactly.
Well done on that. And now sort of like to the main sort of like subject of your PhD. Is that part of your PhD anyway?
So the that review is that meta-analysis and review is part of my PhD. So my PhD, just to give background, focuses on the role of the home environment and its associations with children's weight and their appetite. So that's really what I'm focusing on within the PhD.
And so, and then after that, your next studies are sort of like looking at the home environment per se. So how have you done that, sort of like sequence of studies for, to study the home environment?
So in terms of that, to take it back, there's quite an extensive research around the role of the home environment in relation to children's food preferences, their intake of food, their physical activity and their sedentary behaviours. But what was lacking in the knowledge was the association between the home environment and weight. So that was really the first step in my PhD, to assess the existing literature in that area to understand the role of the home environment in relationships with weight. So what we did was we conducted a systematic review, and we identified 62 studies reporting associations between the home environment and measures of child adiposity. And what we found from that review was that the most consistent associations were observed between the home media environment, so physical aspects of the home media environment, like availability and access to electronic devices within the home. So those things were associated with children's adiposity. So in other words, what we saw was that greater availability and access to those electronic devices was associated with higher adiposity in childhood. The findings were less consistent for food and physical activity environments. And part of my thinking is that the home media environment is easier to measure and conceptualize. So that may be driving some of the reason why we don't see an association in aspects of like the food and activity environments as well.
Do you think it has to do as well with the fact that, people measure them in different ways as well?
Definitely.
And so you've got a whole sort of variety of studies that, conceptualize eating in a different way and physical activity in a different way. What would you say there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that we conceptualize different aspects of the home environment and also their children's eating behaviour and their physical activity levels, I think the lack of consistency in that area really makes it difficult to interpret the findings and to be able to see clear associations.
So if we talk nutrition shop, for example, would you say like, I don't know, 24-hour recalls, food frequency questionnaires, and just a few questions on how they eat? Would those be differences that you would have found on how to measure eating?
Yeah, definitely. Things like that, and also other things like the way that they measured things within the home environment. So availability of food and beverages within the home. So some studies looked at this in quite a comprehensive way. They captured various different foods and drinks within the home via like food inventories and home visits, things like that. Whereas other studies just looked at one aspect, so whether it was energy dense foods or just availability of sugar sweetened beverages, which is just a snapshot of what's actually available in the home environment. I think the other difficulty with research into food environment and children's eating behaviours is that a lot of the research was cross-sectional, and which doesn't take into account reactionary feeding practices. So whether a parent changes the types of foods that are available within the home in response to their child's eating behaviours. So you might have a particularly food responsive child, and therefore a parent might not make those foods available within the home. On the reverse, you might have quite a fussy child who the parent might make a wide range of foods available for them and not be restrictive about the types of foods that they allow into the home because they don't have that concern about the child. So I think that was another one of the reasons why we saw it was so difficult to unpick those scientific findings.
And the same for physical activity, obviously.
Exactly, yeah. And I think the difficulty with physical activity as well is that it's not a clear-cut picture as to whether physical activity is associated with weight.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, exactly.
So that from the start, okay.
Yeah.
And so then, what if you? How does the work of, say, someone like Stephanie Schremp come into this, and then where did you take it from there? Because I know you kind of started. Steph was one of my PhD peers, so I kind of saw that. She finished before I did, but I saw her kind of do that work on the home environment. And what did she do? If you could talk a little bit about that, and what have you taken from there?
Yeah, so the work by Stephanie was really a starting point. And if I go back to how we actually measure the home environment, so in GEMINI, we conceptualize the home environment in terms of three domains. So we look at the food domain, physical activity, and media environment. And within these three different domains, we look at physical aspects and social aspects. So physical aspects include things like availability and access to foods and beverages, physical activity equipment, and garden or outdoor space, and electronic devices within the home. And then social factors include things like parental modelling and support around eating, physical activity, and media behaviour, caregiver rules and limit settings around those different behaviours, and caregiver feeding practices as well. So in GEMINI, Stephanie Schremp developed a comprehensive measure of the home environment called the Home Environment Interview.
I'm going to stop you for a second, Alice, and just sort of say, sorry, I think that just remind everybody, because imagine if someone just comes in for the first time and hears your talk and goes, Gemini, what are they talking about? What is she talking about? Just briefly.
The assumption I made.
Yes, it's like, you know, it's like, oh yes, everyone's heard all the past episodes. If you have, that's great. And, you know, but if you haven't.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's a shocking sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so Gemini is a large longitudinal birth cohort of twins that were born between March and December in 2007.
Yeah, that's plenty, but just, you know, otherwise it's like, whoa, what is she talking about?
Yeah.
So now back to in Gemini, you measure the home environment, or Steph did, yeah.
Yeah, so Steph developed this really comprehensive measure called the home environment interview, which assesses the different aspects of the home environment that I mentioned before. And the home environment interview is administered by a computer-assisted telephone interview, and it takes, on average, about 30 minutes to complete. And this measure was administered within the Gemini families when the twins were 4 years old. And what's really nice about this research is that the team used the measure to create different composite scores of the home environment. So there's 4 composite scores, one for each domain of the home environment, and then an overall composite for the overall home environment. And the creation of these composite scores really allows us to quantify the obesogenic quality of the home environment. And then moving on into my PhD, what we wanted to do was update the measure so that we could re-administer it in the Gemini cohort. Now the children were moving into the teenage years.
Yeah.
So that's really the essence of my PhD, was to update that measure and administer it within the families again when the twins were 12.
Right.
So that was quite a large part of my PhD research.
So how did you update the measure? Because that sounds like really easy, not.
Yeah, so it started with the systematic review, and then we consulted with a panel of experts in the field of childhood obesity research, and we gained their insights into what they felt the relevance of the existing items, and then also gained their suggestions about additional items that needed to be included, and things that they felt were lacking. So what we did from there, and what really came out of that, was the need to increase the scope of questions around the media environment. And the reason being was that the original measure was developed over 10 years ago. And since this time, there's been significant increases in the amount and types of devices available within the home. So there's been a massive change in technology, and this change has led to the changes in the way that children interact with devices and consume media. So we hugely changed that area and just tried to increase the scope of the questions there to try and capture this difference from the original home environment interview. Then we did some piloting with families of 11 to 13 year olds. We did some cognitive interviewing to gain their insights into the updated measure. Then we adapted it further from that based on their feedback. And then we moved forward to being able to use the final version and actually administer it within the Gemini cohorts.
And how long did the interview? Was it an interview, phone call? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a telephone interview, same as the
with
original
the child or with the parent or
with the parents,
caregiver?
Yeah, caregiver. So primary caregiver.
Did you have like mothers and sorry, I'm being like,
No.
asking mothers and fathers, or just like mothers, or or maybe someone else?
Predominantly we had mothers.
Yeah.
But then we did have fathers as well. And the fathers that we did have were very, very keen. And I mean, all the families were lovely. But yeah.
How many interviews did you do?
So I did around 150.
Wow.
So to give some context, I'd hoped to do more, but so I started my data collection around November, December time, 2019, and then continued up until the dreaded pandemic.
Which led you to some more work, which I'll ask you in a bit.
Yeah, so the pandemic happened, and I was doing these interviews, and quite quickly I realised that a lot of things were changing, people's habits were changing, and we realised that the home environment was fundamentally changing and that we needed to stop data collection because it was changing from what it originally was. So that, for me personally, was a bit disappointing, but then it also created this amazing opportunity to look at how the home environment was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown restrictions.
So that's also in your PhD?
That's not in my PhD.
That's like, whoa, okay. But still, I mean, it's a huge question to answer.
Yeah, it was something that we really wanted to do, and something that I thought it would have been a missed opportunity because we had.
You thought you had nothing else to do, or what? To finish your PhD.
Yeah, so I paused my PhD to work on this. So we, Alison filed, and Andrea Smith managed to get a grant, a COVID-19 grant. And I ended up working on this and pausing my PhD to be able to look at the role, the changes within the home environment due to the pandemic and how this had impacted children's mental well-being and their health. And this was really, I think we all saw this as quite an unmissable opportunity because we had this rich baseline information about what the home environment was like pre-COVID, and to be able to collect it again during lockdown and subsequently was really an opportunity that we didn't feel that we could pass up.
Yeah.
So I agreed to pause my PhD and expand my research.
I mean, that's really interesting, but let's go back to the results that you found on your PhD. But and I mean, you're still obviously going to carry on sort of unpicking that data from the COVID time, no? Because you haven't sort of finished with that, unpicking that, yeah.
No, so that's going on in the background.
Yeah. While trying to write up a PhD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not busy.
Yeah. No, not at all. No. I understand, yeah. And then and what have you what did you find really from the first lot of data that you collected?
Yeah, so the first lot of information that we collected, what we found was that we found clear associations between different aspects of the home environment and children's food intake, their physical activity, and their screen-based sedentary behaviours. So in essence, what we found was that children living in more obesogenic home environments had poorer diets, engaged in less physical activity, and engaged in more screen-based sedentary behaviours, so more time viewing screens, but also more time playing video games as well. And what we observed at age 12, which Stephanie didn't find at age 4, was an association between the home environment and children's weight. So a higher risk, more obesogenic home environment was associated with higher adiposity at age 12, which is something that the group didn't find at age 4.
Yeah.
And the hypothesis was always that the children at age 4 were too young for these relationships between the home environment and body weight to be fully expressed and to be observed. And they hypothesized that the relationships may manifest later in life following longer exposure to these environments. So it was really exciting to be able to see that within my PhD.
Yeah. So that's kind of like your sort of end conclusion right now.
Yes. And then
but it has huge implications, basically.
Yeah, huge implications. And so we saw an association between the overall home environment, but then also with the media composite and children's weight as well. So that was a really interesting finding to observe that, especially with the massive increase in the media within the home and its prevalence within our daily lives. So I think that was one area which I found really intriguing, and I think is quite important in terms of preventative strategies in the future and treatment
behavioral
as well. Exactly,
which is what you went into,
exactly.
Which is really, really, really interesting. What about what would you say, like from what you've gathered now, like do you have a few of the results of what's happened with COVID, and how has that changed a bit or not, or is that still too early?
It's very much in its infancy. We have some very preliminary findings around the ways that the home environment changed. So it's really, what we saw was, it's quite a mixed bag. Specifically for the first lockdown, what we saw were differences for the within the home food environment. So there were increases in energy dense foods within the home, but then there were also increases in fruits and vegetables as well. So it was kind of a mixed a mixed bag in a way. There wasn't wholly negative aspects and there wasn't wholly positive. It was some people increased in certain aspects and other people decreased. And we especially saw that in terms of physical activity.
Yeah.
So the lockdown kind of, for some people, I think it was it encouraged people to really get involved in physical activity and come together as a family and kind of develop plans for what they were going to do together, go out on walks together as a family and really bond over that isolation together.
Yeah.
And for other families, I think it was quite a difficult time, especially in families where they didn't necessarily have a garden or they lived in
very confined spaces.
Exactly. Yeah. Where they weren't able to necessarily do online exercise videos in their living room because they just didn't have the room.
Yes. Yeah. So no Joe Wicks there.
No Joe Wicks there. No.
And for anybody listening, in Mexico, Joe Wicks has been a very important person in the UK who has, made everybody get up and do physical activity on the television. And I think, he's been an important part of getting people to exercise during the pandemic. But that's just, I'm just saying that as a cultural sort of point, because otherwise here they're going to go, who the hell is that?
Give him a quick Google.
Yes, yeah, give him a quick Google, exactly, and do the exercises. Get your sort of older parents to do them and stuff. My mother certainly has been doing them every morning, and it's been a lot of fun watching her do it, from a distance.
Yeah, definitely.
So that sort of space. So I mean, those obviously, in its infancy, those results, but that'll also be really interesting. And what do you're going to finish soon, and what would you like to sort of carry on doing? And also I'll ask you sort of two questions. What would you like to carry on doing? And then at the end, what would be your last recommendations for the home environment based on the results of your PhD?
Big questions.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to continue doing is to really stay in this area. I think behavioural science and epidemiology and appetite and the home environment hugely interests me, and it's an area that I think I'd love to explore more. But really, specifically to the home environment research, I think one aspect that I'd really like to look into more is the role of for lower SES families, lower socioeconomic status families, and more ethnically diverse families. I think it'd be really interesting to utilise a comprehensive measure of the home environment and use that within these lower socioeconomic status families and more ethnically diverse populations to really understand the role of the home environment there. And that's really an area that I'd like to explore further.
Yeah, I think that. And actually, again, obviously I'm a dietitian, so coming from that nutrition background, we're taught in a completely different way, and I think I went the same way as you, trying to look for sort of more psychological or behavioral explanations to why we eat or not. And I think that, seeing you in the sort of early career stage, finishing your PhD and, just showing others that they have the same possibilities of actually researching these areas in a completely different way, where you are not just sitting there measuring, sort of how many grams of, sodium or potassium or whatever they eat, and trying to explain it in a way that probably, or at least in my point of view, takes more into account, something a bit more
holistic.
A bit more holistic, definitely. So that's thank you for your input, because I think that is really interesting to see it from that point of view. It's no, it's not just psychologists can study this. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me on, because it's really nice to be able to share my research. And I think when I originally started my degree in nutrition, I was naive to the fact that this world even existed of research, and lo and behold, that I could even be involved in it. But I think we shouldn't silo ourselves off into different areas, or I should just be a nutrition person, or they should just be a psychologist. I think if we all come together, then that's really where knowledge is shared and we can progress the field even more.
Yeah, completely. I agree. And you're not going to get away without, giving us a few tips on really from your research, how you would try and, sort of what would be certain recommendations or, behavioral recommendations based on your research that you think would be valuable, for, in this case, 12 to 13-year-olds, or even if you wanted to extend it slightly, or, But based on your research, what?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, especially taking into consideration individual differences and genetic predisposition to environments. I think one area which I think has definitely come out as an important aspect in my PhD is the role of the media environment. And I think that's one area which I definitely encourage people to take note of a lot more. The way that we interact with electronic devices, the types of devices that are available within the home, and also the location that they are within the home.
The time they spend on them.
Time they spend on them as well. And I think having those devices present in eating occasions, I think that's can be quite a distracting thing to have. And
so I'm thinking of, like, low satiety responsiveness, and then combined with the use of, so you have low satiety responsiveness and you combine it with the use of. So a lot has been said about intuitive eating, and that's that take on how we should recommend behavioral recommendations while we eat. But I think you've got the information to sort of back that up.
Yes, exactly. And not only satiety responsiveness, but food responsiveness. Yeah, exactly. And enjoyment of food to an extent. I think if you're not engaging in your meal and having family meal times together, that can really decrease your enjoyment of foods and your enjoyment of those eating occasions if you're not able to share it with other people. And food fussiness, I think it comes into so many different appetite traits. One thing within my PhD that we're looking at is whether the heritability of appetite traits varies based on the obesogenic risk within the home environment. So that's one study which I'm really excited about it coming out and being able to share the results.
You're just in the process of getting that, but that'll happen after the PhD, no?
So it should, I've analysed the information, but it's very much in its infancy of writing up. So yeah, I'll save that one for another podcast.
Okay, I'll get you back when that paper's out.
Yeah, so another part of my key study within my PhD was using the data that was collected at age 4 within the Gemini twins, and then the data that we collected in my PhD with the Gemini twins at age 12. So we use this to look at longitudinal associations between the home environment and weight from age 4 to 12. But the neat thing about what we did was, so we wanted to look at whether the home environment was driving children's weight, or whether weight, so children's adiposity, was driving the home environment. And what we found was, this hasn't been published yet, but I can share it. So what we found was that it was the media environment within the home. So media environment at age 4 was driving increases in children's adiposity at age 12. So that was a really, really interesting finding, and something that we found to be quite an interesting thing. And we found it for the media composite. We didn't find it for the overall home environment. But it was really the media that had this quite significant impact. So that's definitely was one of the things that got me thinking that that's an area that we really need to focus. Definitely in terms of preventative measures. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alice. This has been a really interesting talk. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say or add, or, you know, to what you've said so far.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think we've covered a lot of the research that I've done, and yeah, it's just been a great opportunity to be able to share my PhD and the research that I'm doing. And
I mean, thank you so much, because hopefully this will give, hopefully, this podcast can be listened to in different places and different parts of the world. And, I live in Mexico, but in different parts of Latin America as well, where this work is, important and needs to also be carried out. And it gives people ideas, and that's, of what to look for and maybe how to do it. And that's why, to me, developing this series on appetite, behavior, and weight has been important. And even though everyone says to me, but hang on, it's in English, and I don't speak English, or not I don't speak English, you have a podcast that's generally in Spanish. I just thought, well, I'll combine this possibility of actually having access to both worlds, and sort of it makes it more personal. So that when I see you, Alice, I think, she looks like someone who's young and who's doing a PhD. Maybe I could do something like that, so that it becomes more inspiring. So that's the idea behind this series. Thank you again, for being here. I will get you back when you publish the rest of your work. And also, just to say to everybody, I'm going to say what I say every time, we continue to nourish each other. I have one more question. Where would you, I'll put your not question, but I'll put your Twitter account. That's probably where people can find you. And you are active on that, which is nice to see. And yes, so
I try to be.
Yeah, well, at least to help disseminate our work and stuff. So that's important. And, if anyone if you liked the, this program, please share with others so that it can be heard, and we can, put this subject on the table, which is, appetite, behavior, and weight. And we'll see you next time. And don't forget to like this podcast, everyone. We'll see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nos vemos en un próximo episodio de Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. Y recuerda, nos seguimos nutriendo.